Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March 11 meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. The meeting is being held electronically, of course, with the governor's safer at home order in place, and to ensure the safety of all of our residents and our staff. All members of the HRA, our staff, and presenters are participating from their homes or their offices. And before we begin, there's a few things to cover. As you all know, today in community comment, that will be the only opportunity to call in to provide any comment via telephone. You are allowed to speak about anything that's not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to call in for community comment, remember that number is 800-374-0221, and the conference ID is 718-84406. 718-4406. 718-4406. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Administrative Support Specialist Liz Olson will be timing the speakers, and she'll let you know if you go over the 3-minute mark. We ask individuals not to be redundant and repeat information they've already heard. I guess that in itself was a redundant statement this morning. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. Thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting online using different types of software and many people participating from home. We hope there won't be any issues, but if there are, we'll try to get them corrected as quickly as possible. So let's call the meeting to order. And is Sharon Allison with us this morning? I didn't look carefully before.
This is Liz Olson.
Liz Olson is going to call the roll. Liz, thank you. Ms.
Commissioner
Olson,
Pierce.
call the roll, please.
Here.
Commissioner, thank you. Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Staunton.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here. Next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a form of meeting agenda that's been published to the public and is in front of us this morning. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the agenda in any form? Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Staunton. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Jackson. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Ms. Olson, with respect to approving the meeting agenda.
Commissioner Pierce.
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson.
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton.
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson.
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. The agenda is approved. Now we will go to community comment. And again, reminding residents who might be listening in, please call or want to call in, call 800-374-0221 if you're not already on the line. Your conference ID is 718-4406. 718-4406. Press *1 to speak. An operator will put you in the queue, and then Director Benarott will bring you into the HRA meeting. Director Benarott, do we have anybody in the queue this morning? Anybody?
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Hovland, members of the commission. Intercall is active, but we do not have anyone calling in at this point. Because there is a slight delay with the broadcast, I would recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on with the next item on the agenda. My clock shows that it's 7:36, so I will come back to you when I have a caller or at 7:37, whichever comes first.
Thank you.
has been over a full minute and I do not have anyone calling in, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with your agenda.
All right, thank you, Director Benarott. Typically, we'd have our city manager, our executive director for the HRA comment on remarks that have been made or call inquiries from the public the meeting before. I don't think we had any. Executive Director Neal?
No.
I don't think you have anything to comment on. It's not on the agenda this morning, but I think that's our typical practice. Next, we'll move to the consent agenda. There's a couple items on the consent agenda. Is there anyone who wishes to remove, any commissioner who wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second.
Member Anderson moves. Member Pierce seconds. Commissioner Pierce and Commissioner Anderson move and second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to adoption of the consent agenda. Ms. Olson?
Commissioner Pierce,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. The items on the consent agenda are adopted. Next, we're going to move on to reports and recommendations, which is the heart of the meeting this morning. And the first presentation we have there is from Bill Neuendorf, our Economic Development Manager. And this is with respect to the methodology that has been devised between the prospective developer and city staff around valuing that property over at the old public works site. I'll turn it now over to Bill Neuendorf, unless Executive Director Neal has anything he wants to raise in advance.
No, we want to get right to it this morning.
All right, thank you. All right, Manager Neuendorf, welcome.
Great. Yes, thank you. Good morning. This item, as you mentioned, is pertaining to the old public works site. It's currently the vacant property at 5146 Eden Avenue. Earlier this year, we did enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Franchute Companies and United Properties to explore a potential sale of that property to be used as senior cooperative housing and as a medical office facility. There's other public infrastructure and public space items that would also be included as part of their eventual submittal. But before we get too far into the design and go to Planning Commission, et cetera, we felt it was important to make sure that both parties are agreeable to the general approach to how this property would be valued. Over the years, we've looked at a lot of different uses for this property: public uses, high-rise uses, low-rise uses. The ultimate way that the property is used really drives that sales price. And so both the prospective buyers as well as our city staff do recommend that we prepare this methodology that's attached in your packet this morning and make sure that both sides are generally agreeable. Now, this doesn't mean this morning that we're agreeing to any particular price. We're not agreeing to any particular project, but we just wanted to make sure that both parties are aware of how a purchase price would eventually be structured. So I have a presentation that I'll share this morning. And then also on our phone call today, we do have representatives from both Franchute Companies as well as United Properties. They'll certainly be available to ask or to answer any questions after we're finished with this. Let's see, so let me share my screen here.
You're in good shape. Your presentation is on the screen.
All right, great, thank you. So the site we're well aware of. For this morning's meeting, I just wanted to cover the background very quickly, describe the project that we're currently aiming at, and then provide some background about what type of considerations are factored when you determine the land value. So certainly the property, it's a little bit over 3 acres. It's been owned by the city and tax exempt since the early 1960s, and it's been vacant since 2013. Over the last few weeks, as we've continued this conversation, engineers and architects working for the developer have been starting to prepare site plans, looking at different constraints and opportunities at the site. and the developers are starting to prepare a pro forma to look at construction costs, revenue, land costs, etc. So there's a lot of work happening in the background that brings us to our point today. As a very high level concept, this is the type of project that we're currently looking at. Starting from the southern boundary along Eden Avenue, we'd be looking at a multi-story medical office building at that corner. Moving to the north, there'd be some public space, a public plaza that would be available for use of the employees, of the customers, of the residents, of the neighbors. The largest element of the site would be a multi-story senior housing development that would be structured not as rental apartments, but structured as ownership units under the cooperative housing model. So that's similar to a condominium, but yet a lot different in the financing of a condominium. And then on the far northern edge of the site, we would set aside space and start to build a public trail and a bridge that allows us to cross over those railroad tracks and connect to that existing parking structure and Jerry's food complex on the other side of the tracks. Along the way, there'd be improvements to Arcadia, as well as an access point or two to make sure that if the freight train ever changes in the future, changes into passenger rail or a bike trail or who knows what might happen in the future, we'd want to retain some type of access points to get to that area. So as we start to shape the land value, it's very important to recognize that there's a distinct difference between the highest value of a piece of property versus fair market value. We also consider the type of project that would be built here. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there would be a residential property as well as a medical office property. And then there's always extraordinary site conditions. In this particular case, the property's been used for many things over the years. When we demolished the building a few years ago, we did clean up most of the environmental contamination that was there. So there's just a relatively minor amount that's left. But that's certainly one of the extraordinary conditions on the site. So the highest value versus the fair market value. Over the years, we've done appraisals. We've always aimed at the highest value of the land. And as you might imagine, if you build a high-rise apartment, you're going to derive a high land value. If we build something much lower in scale, the land value would be lower. So in order to have the property redeveloped in the best practical manner for the community, we recommend that we pursue a fair market value. So I use some examples here. We looked at various comparable projects in Edina, as well as the surrounding suburbs, as well as some of the properties throughout the metropolitan Twin Cities. So on average, when a piece of land is sold for rental apartments, there's always a range in the pricing, but on average, we calculated around $37,000 per unit is where you could estimate your land value. Now that's for a rental apartment that's going to be bought and sold over many occasions over the life of the building. And that's part of what drives up that value. Under the ownership model, a senior cooperative, the land values are much lower. So again, there's a range, but on average, you could estimate the land value for ownership housing is around $23,000 per unit. And that's really driven by the fact that the value of those units are retained by the people that live there. It's not a long-term investment that one company is going to flip to the next. It's someone's home, and they're going to live there, and they're going to enjoy their life there. But we just wanted to be upfront about the fact that an ownership housing project would deliver a lower land value as compared to an apartment building. For this particular residential building, we again wanted to reiterate that those numbers I just showed are averages, and there's a range, and we'll, as we proceed, we'll focus on an actual number. But the land value is also impacted by the sales price of the units, by the development costs, by the density that's allowed by zoning, as well as some of those extraneous site conditions. So for this site, we really have no choice but to build structured parking. This is the site where there's about a 34-foot elevation change from the northern edge to the southern edge. And while it's over 3 acres, it's a relatively small site. Most senior cooperatives have surface parking, maybe some indoor parking, but certainly a lot of surface parking. On this site, we don't have room for a lot of surface, so we'll have to do structured parking, and that's going to drive the developer's cost up, which might mean that it drives our land value down. As we've had conversations with the developer, we've learned that the most cost-effective projects have about 85 to 100 units for senior cooperatives. We think that's a scale that's more appropriate for this site. In the past, we've looked at more dense projects. We've looked at hundreds of units, not 800 units. So, that certainly has an impact to our price, but we think it yields a better project for the community for this location. And then also the city is requiring that at least 10% of the units be affordably priced. So that means that initial purchase price would essentially be written down or subsidized by the other units in the building. That also has an impact on the pro forma and thus has an impact on the land value. There's a similar story to be told for the commercial element. Over the years, we've looked at a variety of different possible uses for that southern edge. Again, over the years, just high level, we've looked at hotels, we've looked at retail, we've looked at like a Starbucks or a Caribou, we've looked at a Walgreens. This site is just off the beaten path enough where it's not highly attractive to a national retailer that would pay you those large land values. So as we did our research, the city hired an independent appraisal company to do some research for us. We also had some really good conversations with the developer. As you probably know, Franju has great expertise in medical offices throughout the Twin Cities. And while land values, again, range from site to site and year to year, the average land value for a medical office building is much less than a general commercial building. So the numbers that I have up here for medical office, you're looking at about $13 and change per square foot in order to allow a medical office to be built, as compared to about $37 if you're looking at a hotel or a fitness center like Lifetime Fitness, or a retail property, or like a national retailer, Starbucks, etc. So again, there's just a big difference in the land value. But again, staff continues to recommend that we pursue a project of this type and of this scale. We don't believe that this site would be attractive to a hotel operator. We don't think that'd be desired by the community at this location. And it's just off the path where Walgreens is not interested here, Starbucks is not interested here. So again, it's I hate to dangle a big shiny number in front of you for commercial space, but I wanted to be very frank, as did the developers, that in order to successfully finance and build a medical office building, the market will only allow a fair price to be delivered. And then certainly as we continue to explore the site improvements, there are several constraints. And frankly, every site has its limitations. There's always pros and cons for every project. So for this particular location, the access to the site is constrained by the railroad tracks. And that will make it a little bit harder for any contractor to build anything on this property. You can't swing a crane over a train track. There's also some of those environmental conditions that we're aware of. In the past, one of the hydraulic pumps had leaked, so that we know there's still a little bit of hydraulic fluid left in the soil. And then there's that big drop off. It's a benefit in some regards, but it's a curse. It's expensive to build on the site and still allow the road to operate and the neighbors to operate. So those are just some unique conditions we'll factor into the overall development in the scheme. So the attachment in your packet is a 2-page narrative. It's set out in basic bullet point type fashion, and it helps identify how the staff and the developers intend to come up with a fair market value. So for the medical piece, we'll be looking at the developable square footage of the property. That includes, space that's used for landscaping, for the building, for parking, for their stormwater, but it's that total development area per square foot is how we'll calculate the price for the medical piece. For the cooperative senior housing, we'll calculate the price based on the number of units. So the more units they can fit into the property, the higher the price goes. And we want to find that balance. It's not just about cramming as many people as we possibly can into the property. It's about coming up with the best project that yields a great quality of living here. So we'll look at similar projects throughout the metro area. So that means that, when it comes to land pricing and unit prices, we'll compare senior co-op to senior co-op and medical office to medical office. We'll also consider some of these unique site conditions. We'll take into consideration some of those public improvement costs. For example, the city will be rebuilding Eden Avenue later this year. There's some things that we might be able to do ahead of time that might benefit the developer. And then on the other side of the coin, the developer will be rebuilding the edge of Interlochen. That's a project cost that we'll have to factor into it. And ultimately, we want to come up with a fair market price that delivers a fair and reasonable value to the HRA that still allows a project to be built, right? It's got to be financeable and buildable. So that's a high level. Some of our next steps here, after we reach agreement on this methodology, in the months ahead, you can expect to see a concept plan submitted for sketch plan review. Eventually, we then start and actually negotiate a purchase price. If we can agree on reasonable terms, then the developer would move forward and actually, hire the architects and engineers to do the full construction drawings, go for the full site entitlements, and then actually sign the contract and enter into into the purchase. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions, and I'll leave my screen up in case there's any questions. But we're open for you.
All right, good. That was a nicely presented segment of the meeting this morning. Manager Neuendorf, are there questions from commissioners this morning? I'm sure there are. Member Jackson, or are you just adjusting your screen?
There we go. I couldn't find my mute button. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have 3 questions. The first one goes, 2 of them are about context. One is, I want to just ask, and I don't know if this is for Mr. Neuendorf or for Mr. Teague, but tell me, if this were a private development, looking at the comprehensive plan and the small area plan, are we, with this public plaza, is this any different from what we would be asking a private developer? And I guess I want to make sure that I don't mind making it bigger than what a private developer would be asked for, but could you sort of tell me what we might be asking a private developer in terms of a public green space?
I'll chime in, and Carrie, you might have additional information here. For this site, there's been so much discussion about this site for a decade and more. The Grandview Framework Plan, which was adopted into the latest comprehensive plan, it calls for some kind of public space here. The actual square footage is not defined. So for various projects, those public spaces are something that generally get discussed and then incorporated into the planning. So I'm thinking, recently, the Nolan Mains project at 50th and France has a public plaza. The Lorient Apartments at 45th and France on Sunnyside, that has a public plaza. That was also a community goal there. The proposal at US Bank on 70th in France has a public plaza. And then a couple projects that were discussed, ultimately they're not going to be built. The 7200 France had a public plaza. The big project that we considered and ultimately rejected at 66th in France had multiple public plazas. So we tend to incorporate those types of public improvements into these larger scale projects. But as far as how it actually gets mandated and how it might be different for privately owned property, I guess, Carrie, I'd look to you if there's any difference in how we'd approach this.
I don't believe so. I think that was well said. Those projects that you mentioned, the public space had varying sizes. The smaller or the development framework, as mentioned, does call for public space on the site, but it's not specifically sized. Some of the graphics show public buildings on the site, but so part of this would be negotiated as they go through that sketch plan, and we can critique it at that point.
Okay.
But in terms of needing to amend the comprehensive plan, they would be within the parameters in regard to density, those types of things.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're holding ourselves to the same standards or higher standards than we would a private developer or a private landowner. My next question is, this just brings to mind thoughts of the senior co-op on York, and it's my understanding that that is not a comparable property because of its age or things. Can you just let me know whether that would be a comparable property under this agreement?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a similar project as far as its approach, but I would not consider that as a comparable to determine the land value. The 7500 York Cooperative, I think, was the first senior cooperative in Minnesota. It was built back in the late 1970s. So land values back in the 1970s are much different than they are today. I did jump on their website. I wasn't able to get a response from them. I did reach out via phone and email to their property manager the other day. But their units, it's a different type of project, but their units are much lower priced than the new ones that would be built here. And that's really due to the age of that property. It's a little bit older. It seems to be well loved. There's a multi-year waiting list to get into that property. So while it's senior, while it's a cooperative ownership model, while there's a strong desire to be there and a strong sense of community, I wouldn't factor that property into this land value.
Okay, and there are comparable properties in the Twin Cities area. Is that correct?
Yes, there are. We were able to find, I think, 29 or 30 senior cooperatives in the Twin Cities that are about the same size, about the same caliber. So Alex can speak to this better than I can, but United Properties has built about 16 cooperatives in the last several years. Gramercy has built several in the last decade or so. We also did find a couple housing cooperatives at the University of Minnesota. Those are for students, and their pricing's a lot different, and the amenities are different. They're aimed for 20-year-olds, not for 60-year-olds. So those would not be comparables, but we still found 29 or 30 senior cooperatives that we could look at and will look at as we price this land.
That's excellent news. Thank you. My final question is probably for Mr. Kendall, and that is the properties that will not be used. Part 2, this looks like a math word problem. And I have to say, I read this several times last night, and I guess it's projects that have received tax increment financing or other governmental assistance for the purpose of reducing the buyer's total development cost, unless an adjustment is made in the land acquisition costs of the comparable site. And I guess my question is, I looked at this and tried to do a sample math problem, and can we qualify an adjustment, whether that's up or down? And maybe, if that's just standard wording and it's, the term of art kind of thing, we don't need to change it. But for a layperson to read that, I couldn't set that up as a math problem because I didn't know whether to go up or down.
Commissioner Jackson, there's a certain amount of flexibility in that language, and I don't know. I think maybe Manager Neuendorf might have a better sense of the direction that the financing might go, whether it would be up or down. So I think there is some flexibility in that language. And as far as the details of how the TIF financing may or may not work, I've not yet seen any analysis of how that might play out. I don't know if Manager Neuendorf has any more information than I do, but I don't have enough information on that yet to give you a solid opinion on how that will play out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Here's a different way to ask that question. I think that might be helpful. I had the same sort of question that Commissioner Jackson had, and that is for Manager Neuendorf. Would you explain your thinking on the potential use of TIF on pricing?
Yes, yeah, definitely. So the reason that we have that item number 2 at the end of the document is just to take into consideration that some cities have used TIF to underwrite the land for projects like this. The city of Minnetonka did that 4, 5, 6 years ago, where they sold a piece of land and then offered a TIF amount to write down the land value. And that might be something we consider here. We haven't honestly gotten into any level of detail like that, but the reason we wanted to include this item is since some cities do use TIF for these types of projects, that does have an impact to the land value. And we want to make sure that as we come up with our land value, we're comparing apples to apples. So that's why we included that particular item.
Well, then
So
could you go ahead, Commissioner Jackson, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'm hearing is that we don't know whether it would go up or down. So that's why it just says adjustment.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for all 3 answers.
All right. I'll hold on that. I was going to ask a segueing question on TIF. With respect to structured parking, that's a potential use of TIF. How would you envision that request from the development team adjusting pricing up or down?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we haven't gotten into any negotiations like that yet. The use of TIF on this site is challenging. We have our housing TIF that is easily applied to rental housing, parking, demolition, construction. If it's rental housing, you can easily use TIF. This is not rental housing. The current TIF district expires later this summer. So we're probably not going to be able to sneak in under that. So we're still exploring whether TIF is the right tool for this project. And we haven't come to any conclusion at this point.
All right. I think that's adequate for now. Commissioner Anderson has his microphone off mute and ready to go.
Thank you. It's off mute because I had so much trouble loading here this morning. I'm afraid to turn it off because I don't know what's going to happen next. But thanks for noticing that, and I'll try to move it back to mute. Just a quick comment, more than anything else. We're not in a sketch plan review this morning, and so I don't want to walk down that road or spend too much time there. We're just agreeing on approach, and we don't know if a purchase agreement's coming. So basically, we're agreeing on approach that we might determine value if, in fact, that occurs, and it's common, I think, knowledge back and forth is to an agreement on the approach. And in reviewing the methodology document, I find that it's very comprehensive and it's using all the customary references and resources. So I think ultimately we can agree that given what we have used as an expectation on the site, that the approach here, because it's limited in scope, and I think everyone kind of agrees that that's an appropriate use on that site, at least so far. So that's okay. I think it's all pretty good. The fair market value in the industry generally indicates that each party has a reasonable knowledge of the value, and so there's staff who is compiling information, and then of course the developer who is very interested in that. And I just want to be certain that when the time comes down the road, that we as a council have a lot of lead time to explore the data, really consider it, and so that, as Director Nuendorf mentions, we are comparing apples to apples and not try to do it with, say, 2 days notice and then not quite have a context for consideration. But all in all, the methodology document, I think, is good, and for the purposes that we discussed this morning, I think we're there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pierce? You look like you're off mute, but you're still on mute. There you
I
go.
have mute buttons. Thank you. I agree with the comments of Commissioner Anderson. Reviewing the document, it seems very comprehensive. The stage that we're at now, I think it's a good approach. The only question I had, and it's a little different than what we've talked about before. Back on slide 7, and you don't need to go back to that slide, but that was the slide where you, Manager Newtendorf, said if the cost goes up, land value will go down. And so when you look through the document, you do see that we're going to have to adjust, which makes sense. But my question is, I would want to understand what's the impact of the land value going down to the structure of the co-op for those who are owners there.
Manager Nuendorf, or potentially one of the development team members?
Let me jump in first, and then Alex can probably provide more detail. Alex Hall with United Properties. So the goal here is to deliver a unit, a home, at a reasonable price that's able to be borne by the marketplace. So if, for example, the development costs are high because it's expensive to build structured parking, if the developer overpays for the land, then that makes it more difficult for the first family to buy that new home. If they pay a fair market price for the land, it allows that unit to be delivered in the marketplace at a price point where the market's going to be able to buy it. So I don't think that a lower land price will devalue the investment of the homeowner. When there's the ribbon cutting ceremony here, there's going to be 90 or 100 or however many units get delivered. There's going to be, X number of wonderful new homes for people. And that land value, it affects the initial construction, but it doesn't harm the future value.
Okay. No, thank you. That you were spot on with my question. That's I would want to make sure. A lot of times when we draft these documents, they are geared towards what's best for the city, how are we going to work with the developer, or we do the sketch plan piece that talks about what the community needs are. And then when we get to the structure of the deal, oftentimes I think many folks in the community feel like we're making decisions that benefit the developer necessarily more than the community. And so I just wanted to make sure, the way I understand co-ops, that we are making decisions that really are protecting the value for the potential homeowner. And it's really important to make sure that that comes through as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Staunton, any comment?
Sure, thanks. I appreciate the comments that were made and the work that's been put into this, but this strikes me as kind of bass-ackwards, with all due respect. I don't really want to have a conversation about how much we're going to sell this for before we've figured out what we're doing here. I can appreciate the effort by staff and the development team to try and put this together, but I don't want to be bound by anything until I know what it is we're going to be doing there.
Manager Newendorf, would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, yes, certainly. Yeah, I understand your concern, Commissioner Staunton. So this document basically says that the parties will we will agree to try to agree. It doesn't lock us into a specific project, 80 units versus 200 units. That's all open for conversation. Doesn't lock us into any particular time frame. It doesn't lock us into any particular price, and it doesn't mandate that we say yes. So I believe even with agreement on this general methodology, the HRA still retains full ownership of the property. We haven't signed any contract. We haven't signed any agreement. But just based on the constraints and the many years of conversation we've had about this site, I think it is a helpful step just to make sure that both parties understand that if we want something on this land other than a vacant site, we've got to come up with a fair value, a price that eventually benefits the HRA, but secondly is priced as something built. So I don't think this locks us into any particular outcome, but it guides us in a forward path. That's the intent.
And I understand that. So maybe the way to do it is to receive it and not approve it. I mean, I just don't, if there's no binding nature to this, then I appreciate the fact that staff and the development team have worked together to try and think through these issues. And we've got a record of the documentation of that, but it doesn't strike me as something that's necessary for us to agree to.
Manager Newendorf, would you comment on why you'd like an approval as opposed to a receipt?
Yeah. The let me pull up the original memorandum of understanding. I believe
I'll do it later.
Let's see if I can find it here. The memo of understanding requires that we consider a methodology. As we consider it, I think it's helpful to staff as well as to the potential buyers and developers that if there's any concerns with any of the terms that they be put on the table today, our intention is to create a path where we can see progress. Does it mean, if you notice on the document, there's no signature line? There's no, it's not a contract. Let me just double check the wording. Yeah, in the memorandum of understanding, item 4C, as in Charlie, says the HRA responsibilities include consider a methodology for determination of a purchase price offer within 60 days of the MOU. So it doesn't lock us into accepting that offer. It kind of warms us up to know what to expect. So if the HRA commission would choose to receive it rather than approve it, I don't think that'd be a problem. Although I'd appreciate input from Attorney Kendall on that matter.
Attorney Kendall, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my opinion, the MOU does not require the HRA to approve this methodology. The MOU required the HRA to consider it. I think you have considered it. I think the development team has heard your comments and your position on it. So in my opinion, you've satisfied the requirements of the MOU, and you would do that by receiving the information and considering it. I don't think approval is an additional required step if Commissioner Staunton has concerns about that step. So in my opinion, you've satisfied the requirements of the MOU.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Staunton, do you have other questions or comments you'd like to make?
Nope. Thanks.
All right. I'm sitting here thinking about past efforts with respect to this property and all the different ideations that you talked about that we'd looked at, Manager Neuendorf, over the time, and some of them we've gotten way down the line on costs for everybody, the city included. In fact, I think the city has been required to bear some of those costs when we've gotten deep into architectural drawings and then been unable to agree on things. So I understand the general thought here and approach with respect to following a methodology on valuation. How we get there, whether it's an approval or a receipt and a consideration, I'm agnostic about that. I thought, remember, Commissioner Staunton raised an interesting issue there. The general observations I would have would be that, this valuation strategy, I think, does reflect our intention to build another kind of housing in Edina that allows people to stay here. And that's one of the things that we've been concerned about, is that people get to the point in life where they want to sell their home and bank some of the equity and still stay in Edina, and that's been a difficult process. And I think this senior housing idea gives us the opportunity to do that. So how we get to the point of making a decision eventually on some kind of a project, that's a story for another day. Other comments I would have would be, I want to make sure that you consider all the pricing variables to come up with a fair market price. I would imagine, I think this was an inherent in one of the comments you made, that if we maintain space for rail access for potential future light rail or commuter rail of some type, that's going to be a factor. Use of TIF, we've touched on that. And then one other thing you didn't really talk too much about was if there was some environmental cleanup work that needed to be done and we had a project approved and you went out to the Met Council or the deed for an environmental cleanup grant, how would you anticipate that being reflected in the purchase price?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that'd be one of the factors we'd have to consider. How we've structured other deals is that, like at 50th in France, we did include the grant amount into the overall financing structure. So, for example, at the 50th in France project, we considered the purchase price, we considered the level of TIF support to build that public parking, as well as the grants that were ultimately received. The only challenge is that the grants are competitive, so you never know if you're going to get it. And if you ask for 300,000, you might only receive 80. So there's a lot of uncertainty until you actually know what those grants, until you know you have it, it's all uncertain. But certainly if there is contamination that requires to be cleaned up, we would certainly include any grant into the conversation.
All right. I think that's just the important thing that all of us are saying, and you've done a good job of, you and the development team so far, that is make sure you consider as many pricing variables as you can think of in terms of anticipating coming back to the council and the HRA for approval on a fair market price when that time comes. So, does that prompt any other comment from commissioners or any other inquiries that commissioners wish to make? Otherwise, I think we should follow Commissioner Staunton's recommendation here. And is there a motion to receive and have staff consider the methodology to be used that was described today when determining a fair market value price for the potential sale of property at 5146 Eden Avenue?
I'm going to amend that motion ever so slightly and say just a motion to receive this methodology. I think we have considered it. So a motion to receive the methodology.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call, please, with respect to the motion as stated.
Commissioner Pierce,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. Matter is approved, received. Next, we're going to move on to Stephanie. Thank you, incidentally, to Dean Williamson, Dave Anderson, Alex Hall for being with us this morning and available for questions. And thank you again, Manager Neuendorf, for that good presentation. Now we're going to move on to our Affordable Housing Development Manager, Stephanie Hawkinson, who has a couple of matters for us to consider. And these both require some action on the part of the HRA. So, Manager Hawkinson, welcome this morning. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Today, I would like to introduce a pilot program. You hear me using that term a lot. I think the idea is as we talked about in staff, I'm throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks to try to help with housing preservation and affordability in the city. And here is another program I'm introducing as a pilot to see how well it works. It's a homeownership rehabilitation program. As you recall, last Tuesday at the City Council, there was a public hearing for the allocation of Edina's block grant funds. Now, this is related. It's just to provide some background information. We, in this chart, since 1992, we have allocated a portion of our block grant money to a housing rehab program. That's in the light green. There were 5 years off. 2015 through 18 and then 2020. But the amount that we allocated was relatively small and there are fairly strict parameters around it. So what I'm introducing today is a modified program that would be in-house rather than administered by Hennepin County. It'd be a program that we have. And some of the major differences are, and I think the Hennepin County one is great for the audience it serves, this one broadens it. In Hennepin County, the income cap is 80% of area median income. The one I'm proposing would have an income cap of 125% area median income. They both address health, safety, and code issues. I did add accessibility modifications because there's some homes that need to be modified as people decide to age in house. They may need to do some modifications to make that feasible. With ours, the loan to value would be 110. Hennepin County is 95. So there's some differences. One of the major differences is with the Hennepin County program, the loan, if someone remains in their home for 15 years, the loan is forgiven. Ours, and has 0% interest. Ours, since it has a higher income level, I'm looking at a 2% interest, but if the home is sold to the HRA and we are able to stick it into a land trust program in our partnership with West Hennepin Affordable Housing Land Trust, the loan would be forgiven. If the HRA, in partnership with WALT, does not acquire the home, then the loan is due. So how this works is looking at a partnership due to capacity issues, looking at a partnership with Center for Energy and the Environment, who we already have a program with, and they administer the housing rehab programs in Brooklyn Park, Bloomington, and elsewhere, is that they would receive the applications, look at them for income, and just check credit and everything else to make sure it would be a solid loan. If approved, their inspector would meet with the applicant and inspect the home to look at code, health, safety issues first. The Home Energy Squad, who we already have a partnership with, would also meet with the applicant to talk about energy improvements, whether or not insulation, higher our value of roofing, windows, a new HVAC system would benefit the homeowner. We'd have a mortgage, then the CEE would work on a scope of work with the homeowner. The homeowner would seek bids on their own. If they needed some assistance would be provided. We'd sign mortgage documents, contractor undertakes and completes the work. The work would be inspected by CEE and or the city inspector. If it's a permit job, unlike painting a permit isn't needed and the CEE would inspect. But any job that requires a permit, our inspectors would become involved. And then we would approve that the contractor get paid. So we have this program already with the CE Home Energy Squad. And as you can see from the chart, interest in it has varied over the years. The peak was in 2018, where there's a push on publicity and marketing. And so we think that this would be a partnership, that we could get more interest in the Home Energy Squad and be able to utilize our contract with them with this rehab program. So meeting two goals at once. And so we provide some of the cost of these visits, and they do the infrared cameras, blower torch tests, and everything else. I had this done in my house, and it was actually incredibly helpful. So the funding for this pilot program would come from the our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And currently with this program, the $250 allocated towards it, we'd still have $2.3 million left in the account. The sources for the program would be our trust fund, and then the owner would have some responsibility, some of the origination fee. We anticipate with that amount, we'd be able to do 8 loans. We'd have to pay CEE, and we'd have for administering this program and for the ongoing work and inspections of that. We have program partners. I mentioned CEE, but since there'd be a signed mortgage, we would work with Community Reinvestment Fund as a loan servicer, and those are the folks that service the Come Home to Edina mortgages. The Edina residents, of course, and then at the end, if the home is looking, the homeowner is looking to sell their home and they want to sell it to us, then our partner would be the West Hennepin Affordable Housing Land Trust. So what I'm seeking today is approval of the allocation of $250,000, and then to authorize staff to engage an attorney to draft the loan documents and the agreements with CEE and CRF. I would come back to you with the final approval of the documents, the agreements, and then we'd market the program.
Questions for Manager Hawkinson? Comments? Commissioner Jackson? Oh, excuse me, I didn't see. Go ahead.
Well, Ron can go ahead. That's fine.
Commissioner Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple questions, Director Hawkinson. The 2% interest, when is that simple interest? I assume there's no amortization on the loan. So would that be paid annually or monthly? How would you do that?
Commissioner Anderson, Chair, that would be all deferred. So it'd be accumulate with the principal at the time the home was sold. In part because we're going to forgive the whole thing.
Possibly.
If they sell to the land trust, we couldn't accept any payments during the duration of the term.
Yeah, that was a question. And so so will that interest accrue as unpaid principal balance, and then is interest then and going forward? Is that interest charged on that amount?
Yes. Chair, Commissioners, yes, indeed. And so what happens, for example, with the Come Home to Edina program, there are two tracks. One is interest only, which is paid monthly, and then one is shared appreciation. But we do a calculation at the end with the shared appreciation because we cap it at a 5% simple interest. And so then you calculate what the interest would be per year, multiply it by the amount of years that it's outstanding, add that to the principal. And then that would be due at the end.
That can actually, over say 15 years, that mounts up. That's a significant amount at the end. So let me just, so in projecting forward, at that point then, would the expectation be that the HRA would waive that total amount of interest as part of forgiving the loan if in fact the HRA acquired that property?
Correct.
Okay. And then if not, then that principal balance, which would tick up quite a bit, is the responsibility of the homeowner at that point.
Correct. And it would come out of the sale proceeds of the home.
It's just something to consider before we come to a final approval. And then, the other thing is, why only one contractor bid?
Chair, Commissioners, in part, we talked about that with CEE, and there's been a really intense uptick in construction, and it is challenging. I mean, even on big projects, getting more than one bid. There are just not enough folks in the field that are doing this type of work to be able to get multiple bids, and it has hurt some of these smaller companies because they'll be fulfilling the obligation of doing the second or third bid on a home and putting the time and effort to meet with these folks, knowing that they're just filling an obligation of getting more than one bid and that there's no intention of going with them anyway. And so it has hurt some of the small companies from a time perspective.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Anderson, would you follow up on your earlier comment on the computation of interest and the potential effect of that? And you said, let's consider that before we make a decision. And I'd like a little bit more content around that and what you want us to be thinking about.
When I flash forward to say we're 15 years, if I'm accruing simple interest on 2%, and so in the first year, if I've got we've got a $30,000 deal there, right? Let's call it $30,000. So at 2% is $600. So at the end of year one, we're $30,600. The end of year two, we're $30,600 plus $720, and so on and so on. So as that principal balance continues to accrue, it's essentially compounded interest on that 2 points. And again, say at the end of 15 years, we've got a significant burden on the part of the homeowner who qualifies for this type of grant loan. So we've got somebody in a position there over the course of time that wouldn't be an enviable one. What I think we would want to see is if the HRA can acquire the property, that's a benefit to the HRA. And it may be that that seller who is compromised financially going in, if that seller has to deal with a significant uptick amount, it becomes unmanageable for them. So they're kind of left in default by selling it to HRA. Their equity may be left behind. Maybe that's inescapable if we charge 2% interest. The other program charges none. And it may be that the purpose in charging none is to avoid that type of compounded interest going forward. And the option, I guess, could be that interest is payable on an annual basis, or we keep it as simple interest and not compounded. Compounded. There's workarounds here, and so I just want to be sure that we don't create an undue burden for an applicant who may lose their equity just in unpaid interest. That it will turn into a significant amount over an extended period of time. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So
Chair, Commissioner,
go ahead, Manager Hawkinson.
I hear you. And how we do it with the Come Home to Edina program is we don't compound it. And so it's $600 a year times how many years the mortgage is outstanding. So it doesn't become $30,600 and then the interest is based on 2% of that. It's based on the original principal amount. So that would be $600 a year. So if it were 10 years, it'd be $6,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
6,000 plus 30, so that'd be $36,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Anderson, I think, I was just doing some quick math too. If somebody holds it 15 years on a 6,000, it would be a $9,000 obligation, which is a significant amount of equity, even at simple interest, not compounded. So
Yes.
I think you're making an interesting point here, is that maybe we had to think about, if we want to charge interest, that it should not be compounding.
Yes.
Other commissioners, Commissioner Jackson, you had some questions or comments?
I did. So just sticking with that, I guess I would really prefer to give the homeowner the opportunity to pay annually if they choose to. I mean, it could be an option to defer payment on interest, but that really bothers me that we wouldn't allow them to pay interest if they were interested in it. I think that's a penalty, and it concerns me. So we want to make this something that's useful for people. So setting that aside, I do want to thank you, Stephanie, for coming up with all these different options to preserve smaller homes in the community. It's certainly something I've heard a lot about, and you've been creative with this, and I appreciate the clear explanation of how this works and finding a partner to administer it so the city's not getting into the real estate business. I appreciate that. And so thank you. The one question I did have is with the attorney's fees, what fund would that come out of? Would that come out of general HRA funds, or would it come out of this $250,000 that we've set aside?
Chair, Commissioners, we need, I don't know right now.
Okay.
That is a conversation that I think I need to have with the finance team and the city manager. In some cases, we have pulled it out of other affordable housing funds to pay for those type of administrative costs. They tend to not have come out of the trust fund or the 250. The 250 would be for the program, and so our attorney fees would not be out of that 250.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. Other questions from commissioners? I've got a couple here. When I look at your chart here, you've got uses, the CEE admin fee, $1,500. Is that an annual cost, projected annual cost, or is that a one-time cost?
That's, Chair, Commissioners, that's a setup fee.
Okay, and what about the CEE loan fees? Is that going to the loan servicer or the loan administrator?
That would be going to the CE, not CRF, and that would be, some of it is the title work, the mortgage fees for recording. Some is the inspection fee, the first inspection fee, then the second inspection fee for closeout. And so that is a per mortgage. They have to charge a fee for each homeowner they're serving. So one is an overall umbrella fee, the $1,500, and the other one is based on number of loans.
All right. And then how do we pay the, I just lost my screen here. The loan administrator, how do they get paid annually?
Chair, Commissioners, we're still in the negotiating, and this is part of the returning to you. Since they anticipate that it's only 8 loans, what the fee that we pay for Come Home to Edina is a fairly nominal fee. There is a fee, of course, but it's relatively nominal, and they are still trying to figure out what that would be for such a small pilot program. So that would be something that I'd be coming back to you with.
Okay. All right. Any other questions at this point in time? So we've got our affordable housing manager is recommending we approve a motion or engage a motion to approve a pilot home rehabilitation loan program with $250,000 funded by our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and authorize the city attorney to engage in the drafting of documents and contracts with the Center for Energy and Environment to administer the program and the Community Reinvestment Fund to service the loans. Is there any commissioner that cares to make that motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Staunton moves.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson seconds.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment quickly.
Yes.
I just want to applaud Stephanie on her continuing creativity and perseverance on figuring out new and creative ways of trying to figure out how we can make it easier to hang on to your house if it's affordable, and combining it with sustainability on this one is terrific. So nice work.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've got the concurrence of the entire HRA on that. It is a continuing effort, that creativity, and really, really laudable. Thank you. Commissioner Pierce.
Yeah, just one question. Well, not question. I do applaud the creativity, like we just talked about. In this particular program, calling it a pilot, right, makes all the sense in the world. But as we go forward, I'm just not sure how we would evaluate whether this was successful or not. If our intent was to have more affordable homes that the HRA owns at the end of a particular cycle, right, that could be a metric. And so as we go forward in the pilot, I would like to see how we're going to measure it to figure out if it's been successful or not. So that's it.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner. You might look at that comparable program too that we've had in place for years, where we've loaned money to folks to help fix up their homes. I know we've got a preservation process here that is to be used with homes valued at $450,000 or less, but I think that's an important consideration. Is what's the benefit of preserving those particular properties, regardless whether the HRA ends up with the homes or not? I think we might see some indicators there in the general marketplace. So, anything else from commissioners? All right, we've got a motion and a second. Roll call, please, Ms. Olson.
Commissioner Pierce.
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson.
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton.
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson.
Aye.
Chair Hovland.
Aye. Motion's approved. And the final matter we have today under reports and recommendations is also one that Manager Hawkinson has, and that is to potentially approve a amended partnership agreement with the Metro HRA. Manager Hawkinson, do you want to lead us through this matter, please?
Sure, thank you. Last November, the HRA approved $2 million to expand a partnership we had with Metro HRA's Family Affordable Housing Program. At that time, what was approved was moving forward with the idea that the HRA would acquire homes lease them to Metro HRA for $1 annually. And then the Metro HRA would rehab them and do ongoing management for families in their program. Since then, as we are starting to work on some of the legal documents, we've had conversations on both sides with both legal teams and wanted to thought it may be better, cleaner, if we serve more as a bank and have the Metro HRA acquire the homes, rehab them, own them, maintain them, and we have a loan agreement with them for 25 years, zero interest that is forgiven at the end of the term, at the end of 25 years, if they fulfill their duties of renting these homes to program participants. Instead of having the HRA own the homes, have the Metro HRA. Instead of Edina HRA own the homes, have the Metro HRA own the homes. So that is what I am proposing, a change be made.
Questions for commissioners? From commissioners? Comments on this notion of us as the HRA not owning these homes, but having Metro HRA own these homes? Commissioner Jackson?
Yeah, I guess, as you explain it, the question pops to mind that if the Metro HRA owns it and the loan is forgiven at the end, how can we ensure that equity stays in Edina? That we're not working on homes in Edina and then subsidizing homes in Minnetonka. I guess I don't understand how that works so that we can use our money to protect affordable housing in our community.
Manager Hawkinson?
You're correct. I mean, that is a concern that at the end of the 25 years, they would sell the homes and then take the value and invest elsewhere. I mean, they want to grow the program in Edina, but as far as leadership in 25 years and where their incentives will be, I don't know. I mean, we could have that part of the agreement. How we would enforce it would be challenging.
Thank you. I guess I'm unwilling to give that control to a board 25 years from now that we don't know after the funds have come from our community. I'd like to ensure that they stay in our community.
Manager Hawkinson and Attorney Kendall, could we craft this agreement in a way where during the life of the loan, the Metro HRA owns the home, but the proceeds of the sale of that home are returned to our HRA or our Affordable Housing Trust Fund?
Mr. Chairman, I rather doubt that they would agree to structure the program that way. And we could certainly try to negotiate an agreement like that. Part of the reason for this proposal from Manager Hawkinson was because there is already some structure in place right now for the Metro HRA to own these homes. And currently the Edina HRA doesn't have as much structure in place to act as a landlord and be in the business of home ownership, whereas the Metro HRA is already engaged in that business. So that's, I think, part of the reason for the change. Certainly we would have control during the life of the loan and life of the project. And I think Commissioner Jackson is correct. At the end of that, there comes a point where we'll probably have to relinquish control. I don't think they're going to agree to a forgivable loan that's not truly forgiven, so we're going to have to, we can certainly discuss with them whether we can negotiate some kind of term where they return some of the money at the end. It's not fully forgiven. We've not really opened that discussion with them, and I think Manager Neal has something he wants to jump in there.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify what I think I heard Member Jackson say. I didn't hear you say you wanted the money to come back to the HRA. You just wanted the money to come back into the community, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That may give us a little bit of room to have another discussion with the Met Council, with Metro HRA folks.
And I don't know if something like a right of first refusal. I mean, I don't want us to be in there. I love the elegance of this, but I am concerned that we put money into a program and then it gets spent in other communities because we have a challenge with affordable housing here at home.
We've not discussed with them the option of a right of first refusal, but we could certainly propose that and see if we can negotiate something.
Great, thank you.
I think the fundamental issue is, as Commissioner Jackson states, is we're providing $2 million for this effort, and at some point in time, it may be vanishing into other communities, and we don't want to see that happen. So that was why I suggested it come back to the HRA. Then we had absolute control over it. They had to basically give us our money back, but in the interim period of time, or at least, yeah, I guess what we're Executive Director Neal is heading is that we require that the Metro HRA, as a term of making a deal with them, use the money that use the proceeds of the sale of an affordable home in Edina only. So this money continues to get recycled in Edina. That's a possibility that we may be comfortable with. But what if we have, as an HRA, 25 years from now, other ideas on how we could use the money in our own community, and we're saying basically, you know, let us make that decision.
Chair, Commissioners, I don't disagree at all, and I think that is something that we can bring up with them. That is somewhat of a difference from how we have treated supporting affordable housing and other developments, whereby we have provided some of the gap financing, had a required affordability period, and then they satisfied their obligation with no anticipation of the money coming back. So this would be a different tact than what we have taken with other affordable housing investments.
Do we have any idea of what it would cost us to set up the structure for the HRA to actually be in the home ownership business? I mean, other communities have done this. There must be some models or templates out there.
Mr. Chairman, yes, other communities have done this. It's time and labor intensive. If the HRA is looking at wanting to maintain or reap the equity, I might consider recommending that you go back to the original structure proposed back in November, which would be owning the homes and leasing them for $1. We do have the structure in place right now to probably carry out that type of program. We don't currently have the structure in place to implement the type of program that they have in St. Louis Park or Plymouth with multiple staff members, you know, administering affordable housing vouchers. That's a structure we just don't have in place right now. And I think it would take significant time and money to get that into place.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would agree. That's a strategy that's certainly available to us, but it's one that we have been avoiding, to be honest with you, with the effort to put most of our affordable housing dollars into actual grants, loans, and affordable housing projects rather than additional staff. But it is something we can take a look at in terms of what that next step is what the cost of it might be.
So would you remind us, Attorney Kendall, what how that structure would work if we own the properties and they're leased for $1 a year or something like that? Would we be leasing them to Metro HRA and then they would manage the properties and we'd pay a fee for managing the properties? We're having them manage the properties?
that's correct, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure Director Hawkinson probably knows more about the details than I do, but my understanding is that, yes, we would lease that to them for $1. They would take care of all the property management. The property management costs would be paid out of rent proceeds. So the city could essentially let the HRA handle all of the administrative and management tasks and then would still own the property at the end of the term.
Commissioner Jackson, what does that program sound like to you?
So the current program, I think that's, I'm sorry, this is getting complicated, so I kind of skipped a groove a little bit there. So Mr. Kendall just described the current program, which I'm perfectly good with. And then I honestly kind of missed the end of what he said. I apologize.
Do you want me to pop
Yeah,
in?
go ahead, Manager Hawkinson, please.
The way it was approved in November is that the Edina HRA would acquire the home. With each home that we acquired, we'd have to hold a public hearing before we acquired it. So it would be known to the community that these homes would be acquired by the HRA and that they would be for Metro HRA participants. Then we would lease the property to Metro HRA, who would do the rehab and ongoing management and maintenance. But we would have title to it. We would just be leasing it to them for $1. What would pay for the ongoing management and maintenance would be the rental income that they receive from the property. So the Edina HRA would be buying these properties for the intent that they'd be rented to Metro HRA participants. And so there was some concern that it was a little clunky because with each house that we bought, we'd have to, do a public hearing and the time lag and all that just from the process of acquiring homes. But we would maintain title.
Well, I think maintaining title is really important. And if we can't have a legal agreement, I mean, owning it is much more powerful than any kind of contract we could write with HRA. So I'm just concerned, when we talk about affordable housing and people are concerned when we do this in apartment complexes, that 20 years is a blink of an eye in the world of real estate. And so 25 years in real estate is not as long a time as it is in human life. And so, 25 years, anything can change. And I'm really, really reluctant to give up that control. I think a public hearing is a kludgy thing to go through, but then the community knows what's going on. I don't know about the privacy of the families that would be living there, how much that affects that. But I'm pretty adamant that I don't want us to lose control over this to such a broad agency.
Commissioner Jackson, so we've got the existing program which controls use of the property or ownership of the property. If they were able to craft with Metro HRA a program that controlled use of the proceeds upon the sale of the residence, that it was to be used solely in Edina, so we were looking at a control over use of proceeds instead of an ownership of property situation, would that be equally satisfying to you or fulfilling?
So if a home goes into the HRA program and they rent it out and everything, and then a time comes to sell it, we would have an agreement where the proceeds of that sale would be used back again in Edina. That again is a contract right versus a property right. It would address my concerns. I'm all in favor of doing things in a way that's efficient and useful, but I'm concerned that contracts can be broken, and I would want to see the agreement in writing before I said that was okay, because I just, like I said, needs will change in our area, but we're putting $2 million. This is a significant amount of money to lose control over. So If there's an agreement that you guys can work on and bring back to us, I will look at it with an open mind. But I guess that's just kind of my ongoing concern.
Yeah, this was more a conceptual discussion, understanding that they'd have to come back with some ideas. But
Right.
at least if we knew that the HRA was comfortable advancing that concept, is that these monies that we provide to Metro HRA are going to be used forever in perpetuity in Edina, some way, somehow. You know, is that equivalent to home ownership by the HRA?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the goal I would look for. And I would love to go forward looking at options, and I would entertain them, but I just want to put that value out there in the consideration.
So if the 2 million grows because of inflation into upon sale of properties into something greater than 2 million, do we want more than 2 million back because they've used our money for that period of time? Do we want some share of the equity that gets built over and above what we invested with them in the first place, or are we just worried about getting our $2 million protected and reinvested?
Oh, I think we'd want the whole bucket. I would personally. So if we put money into a program and it grows, that money needs to stay, whether it grows or whether it shrinks, that needs to stay within the boundaries of our city. I don't see this as a program to subsidize other communities. That's a completely different discussion than what we're talking about here. And I'm concerned that it would turn into that, I guess.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Commissioner Sutton.
Can I suggest that we have plumbed this as far as we can and direct staff to try to resolve it from here and bring us back something that satisfies? I think Commissioner Jackson raises some really important points, and it sounds like I'm sure there's some way we can figure it out.
I don't think we need any type of motion to do that. I think this conversation has been sufficient for purposes of Manager Hawkinson and Attorney Kendall. Okay. Any other commissioners have thoughts they want to share at this point in time? That would be guiding in nature for Manager Hawkinson, or do we all have that same mindset as advanced by Commissioner Jackson? Sounds like we do. Okay. Good. All right. Manager Hawkinson, do you feel like you have sufficient direction here?
I think so. I think between Mr. Kendall and myself, we will be working with Metro HRA and come back to you with an agreement for approval.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Jackson, for raising those important issues.
Thank you, team.
All right. On to correspondence. I see there's nothing shown on the agenda. Has anything come in this morning that we need to be mindful of?
Nope. We've not received any.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Olson. Any HRA commissioner comments this morning?
No,
and executive director comments? Anything?
Bill, how quickly can you do a 4917 update? Just want to give a timeline update.
Yes. Yeah. I just wanted to provide a quick update. So Reuter Walton Companies has started the sketch plan review process to look at potentially redeveloping the Perkins site near City Hall at 4917 Eden. So they've gone through the Planning Commission, City Council, neighbors to get input. They've reached out to us recently to ask us to explore the potential to use tax increment financing on that site. I just wanted to raise that to your attention. There are a number of community goals that are related to that property. Retaining space for a future off-ramp for MnDOT, some roadway improvements at the intersection over at Wilson and Eden. So there are a number of community goals in our Grandview plan, our Grandview transportation plan. So I just wanted to raise that to your attention that we will be looking into whether or not TIF is appropriate or possible here, and we'll provide updates in the future if we move forward.
Did that prompt any comments from commissioners? All right, very good. Thank you for that information, Manager Neuendorf. All right. Executive Director comments, anything else?
The only other comment I'll have, and I'll make it quick, is that we have been talking about that we will adopt from a staff perspective the same sort of timeline concerns around public hearings at the HRA that we have at the city council. So when we have sufficient amount of time and notice, et cetera, we will schedule a public hearing for the HRA and then a subsequent action at the following meeting. There are times when that doesn't work very well with HRA business. But if that happens, we will inform you of that. But the default condition will be the two-step situation like we do at City Council.
All right, very good. Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Member Jackson moves, Member Anderson seconds. Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Jackson. Any further discussion? All right. Roll call, please, Ms. Olson, with respect to adjournment.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Pierce,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner Staunton,
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson,
Aye.
Chair Hubland.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Didn't realize we were over a little bit on time. Thanks.